Hello my friends, welcome back to my 4-Star School YouTube channel. In this video, I'm going to talk about the floating action button in the Flutter. So please feel free to subscribe my channel and turn on the notification so you won't miss out the latest Flutter tutorial. Okay, without further ado, let's get started. First, we're going to open our Visual Studio Code and connect it with our Android emulator. As you can see, I have set up this very basic project with our app bar and the text widget shown on the screen. I'm going to start from this point and talk about the floating action button. Back to today's agenda. You will see inside our scaffold we have this floating action button attribute, so we can place our floating action button inside this floating action button attribute. So let's back to Visual Studio Code, and inside our scaffold we can find this floating action button attribute, and we can pass the floating action button. This class by default created by Flutter team, and inside this floating action button, when you move your mouse in this class, you'll see actually it defines lots of different attributes we can specify inside this floating button. So the most important one is this child attribute and the onPressed attribute. So for child attribute, I'm going to place an icon widget because this child actually receive any kind of widget. So I'm going to use this icon widget. Just place this one. And also another important attribute we need to specify is this onPressed attribute. So for now, I just leave it empty. So when I save, you will actually see our floating action button show on bottom right of the screen. There are two attributes. One is the background color, another is the foreground color. So we can change its background color. So by specify this background color attribute, let's change its color to red. So when you save, you'll see this blue color actually turn into the red. Another attribute is this foreground color. So we can change this foreground color to something green. So when you save, you'll see this icon actually turn into green. It also provides an attribute called minute, and you can make it smaller. So by set this minute to true, you will notice when I save the code, this button actually become very small than before. And if you want to set the height and weight manually, so you can wrap this floating action button by the container widget. So inside this container, you can specify it is height probably 300 and weight is 300. So when I save, you'll see we have a big floating action button. Maybe it's too big. Going to change the smaller. Right, we can change its height and weight by wrap with this container widget. So I'm going to remove our container widget. For now, let's save again. Back to our original size, and also remove this foreground color. And another attribute is this shape attribute. We can also turn this floating button into different shape. So here I'm going to specify this shape attribute, and I'm going to pass this rectangle. I think it's called rounded rectangle border. So I can pass this rounded rectangle border class, and when I save, you'll see this floating action button actually turn into a square. Alright, inside this round rectangle border, you can specify it is border radius, right? And we can change it is border radius using border radius dot circular, and we can pass some number. For example, here I just pass A, and we will have this rounded shape. Floating action button, it also provides this elevation attribute. So by default, we have signed a small shadow under this background. So when we set this elevation to 0, we will remove all of those shadow. Okay, I think I go over all the attributes I want to cover in this video. You can also try those different attributes by yourself. And next one I'm going to talk is this floating action button extended. It has two more attributes than the normal floating action button, which is this icon attribute and label attribute. Back to Visual Studio Code. Here I'm going to comment out this floating action button, and I want to use another one which is called floating action button extended. Right here you see we still have implemented this onPressed property, so I just leave it empty for now. And also this label, which just a text widget, so I can pass a text widget. I call it favorite. And also we have this icon attribute, so we can pass any kind of widget. So here I'm going to pass the icon widget using icons dot hard it's like sum up, right? Okay, so when I save, okay, I missed the comma. So when I save, you will notice our floating button now have this icon and as well as the label. Okay, next one I'm going to talk about how you can integrate your floating action button with the normal button navigation bar. So back to Visual Studio Code, and here I'm going to create a very basic button navigation bar. So here inside this scaffold we have a button navigation bar, right? Inside we need to pass the button navigation bar. In the button navigation bar, we need to specify these items, and inside this item we can use a button navigation bar item, right? So for the button navigation bar item, we need to specify this icon. So I can use these icons class icons. And I'm going to use the home first, and I just copy that and I paste it. Right, so I change this home to settings. Also need to give this button navigation bar item a label attribute. So we just specify this label. The first one will be home, and the second one will be settings. Right, so we need to specify it is a label attribute. Okay, when I save it, you will see we create these two button navigation bar items. And here I'm going to comment out these floating button for now, and I using my previous one. So I save. In order to combine these icon with this button navigation bar, inside this scaffold we have a floating action button, a location attribute. So we can use a floating action button location, this class, and inside this class it defines a lot of static attribute we can access. So in here I'm going to use this center dot. Right, when I save, you will notice our floating action button will actually hooked in this button navigation bar. So let's save. and you will see these floating action button actually move to the center of these button navigation bar. And you can also adjust these position of this floating action button. So as I mentioned before, we can wrap these floating action button with our container. So inside this container, we have a margin padding attribute, right? So in here, I can specify the margin attribute. So we can use edge only, right? And we can specify the top. We can give it like 40. So when I save, you'll see this floating action button will move down a little bit. So I save, you see we can actually adjust the margin of padding to move this floating action button a little bit up or a little bit down. Okay, I think that's all for today's lesson. I hope you enjoy learning Flutter with me, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I will continue uploading the Flutter tutorial. Okay guys, thanks for watching. I will see you in next video.